This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellow Wall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 480 of the Yellow Wall Pod. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and today we will preview the biggest game in club football, the Champions League Final. Borussia Dortmund against Real Madrid in Wembley on Saturday, June 1st at 8 p.m. local time. For just that joins me Matthias Zug. Hello Matthias, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Stefan. How are you?
I'm doing very well myself, thank you. And also here Lars Perlman. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, I'm fine, but a little bit anxious about how often I will go slip into German and call them Real Madrid instead of the more English Real Madrid.
Real Madrid. All right. Well, I asked for listener questions, and obviously there are a lot of questions about Dortmund's new sponsor that we will discuss in an episode that's not today, because I want to focus on the Champions League final because I think the game is more momentous than ever. But we'll start with a question from Lukas Stoller, and he writes, I asked last May how the excitement for the final match day compared to prior title chances. How does this week's excitement compare to last year, and does last year's disappointment have any effect on your current feelings? Matthias, how are you feeling?
Well, given that I'm in the middle of closing on a house and packing to move, I haven't had a lot of time to think about that, thankfully. It's different. I mean, last year it was so palpably close that the excitement was higher than Champions League final. I'm actually looking at this Champions League final relatively relaxed because Dortmund are the underdog, and so you kind of have nothing to lose. I was more anxious a year ago because I just thought it was going to happen. This year, it's not quite that. And if you look at past years, I mean, if I compare it to 1997, when I was 19, I was really anxious then because it was the first time in a Champions League final. If I compare how I feel now versus the Champions League final against Bayern, in 2013, I was more nervous then because it was Bayern, so it was a different feel as well. So honestly, my nerves are pretty good.
Yeah, I must say I'm relatively calm too. Maybe just because it's not against Bayern, and the entire narrative that surrounded that game due to the previous history of the years between Dortmund and Bayern that made it to something a little bit more. And obviously the status of Dortmund and Bayern in 2013 was also a little bit different than it is now. Lars, how are you feeling about this Champions League final?
Pretty similar to you guys, I guess. I'm definitely, it's not colored by what happened a year ago in my mind whatsoever. When was it? Monday, the anniversary of the match day that never happened and we will never discuss again. I found myself actually a bit surprised when I looked on the calendar that it was the anniversary, because there was no, at least to my perception, there weren't many, look back pieces or whatever. So it was just a normal Monday, and it doesn't color my level of excitement or expectation for the Champions League final. I think the monumental difference is the reaching the Champions League final in itself is such an achievement for a club the size of Dortmund, who really shouldn't be here. I mean, the European football system isn't designed for a club like Dortmund, which is, top 12 or 16, financially and sporting wise over the years, but not at the absolute elite level. They're not supposed to be in a Champions League final. So I think, as you could see when they qualified in Paris, a lot of the celebrations were, I guess, comparable to when teams win an actual trophy. just because it's such a great achievement. So in a way, obviously, that's not how they will look at it on Saturday evening. But going into this final, it kind of feels to me anyway, maybe that's just a personal thing, like they've already achieved so much that the game is almost a bonus. Obviously, I want them to win, and I'm more bullish on their chances than a lot of people, weirdly enough, I think. But I think just the level of expectation compared to the final match day of the last Bundesliga season, I don't think it measures up anyway. So I'm quite calm, relaxed as always, I guess.
Well, I'll say this. I am well aware that even if I'm feeling calmer than usual, I know that losing a Champions League final is always heartbreaking and will leave a scar no matter what. So that possibility is obviously there. But also, as you just said, Dortmund have a chance to win the Champions League. And Lars, since you already said that you were bullish than most on Dortmund's chances, maybe start with that. Why do you think that?
Well, I mean, it might be a bit of, I don't know, selection bias or, being in a wrong bubble on Twitter or whatever, or football Twitter, but it feels to me like most people kind of expect or are just wondering how big the margin for Real Madrid is going to be, because they are so much better than Dortmund, and obviously on paper, you would back Real Madrid 9 times out of 10 in a Champions League final, especially against the team that came 5th in the Bundesliga and didn't look good doing it. But I think we've seen from Dortmund in this Champions League season that they are quite comfortable in that role. I'm not sure how comfortable Real Madrid are in when they have to dictate the game quite a bit, which is what I think is going to happen, because Dortmund are going to let the game come to them in a sense. And we've seen from Dortmund that they can, spring a surprise on a team that is of higher individual quality. And I don't know necessarily how often over the last few years I've seen Real Madrid, absolutely dominate the big games in the Champions League. More often than not, it feels like those were more cagey matches. Obviously, there's all this talk about Real Madrid's black magic, with all the late goals, even in the semifinals against Bayern, but also in the last few meetings with Man City. And there was this Champions League run when they were looking to go out 3 times going into injury time, and 3 times they managed to scrape by. So I just don't know how Real Madrid are going to handle, being the team that has to kind of dictate how things are going. I think Dortmund are in a fairly decent situation going into this game, because as we alluded to earlier, there are not too many expectations on them. We've seen, them spring surprises on people, so why shouldn't that happen on Saturday? I think one thing that also works in the underdog's favor, at least from, like a statistical point of view or whatever, is how very few goals there have been scored in the last few Champions League finals. I think, isn't it like 5 of the last 6 or whatever were 1-0s, and XG says it should have been 12 goals scored when in actuality it was only 6 or whatever. So Champions League finals tend not to be high scoring affairs, and obviously that means that a bit more depends on luck and whatever, and luck has been on Dortmund's side this Champions League season. There's no 2 ways about it. Luck has obviously also been on Real Madrid's side when we look back at the semi-final against Bayern with a couple of refereeing decisions and all that stuff. So ultimately, I think the talk is the winning margin for Real Madrid and how much of a sensation it would be if Dortmund won. And obviously, if I were a betting man, I would probably have shorter odds on Real Madrid winning, but I don't think it's as delusional to think that Dortmund have a real chance. So if I think immediately after Dortmund and Real Madrid were confirmed as the finalists, I think I said privately it's like a 65-35 chance for Real Madrid, and I think if we polled 100 people, I don't think 35 would say that Dortmund have a real chance at winning. So that's why I'm probably more bullish than other people.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it is interesting to observe how the psychology of this game will be. On the one hand, you just said, Lars, Dortmund do not have the same pressure as Real Madrid, because Real Madrid are obviously, as you just highlighted, more expected to win. And as we've witnessed ourselves with this Dortmund team last season against Mainz, although we're never going to talk about it, sometimes in these situations, players just get tired. And that can then make them make weird decisions and play weirdly under their level. Now, obviously, Real Madrid have players in their ranks like Toni Kroos, who have all the experience in the world when it comes to winning the Champions League. So I think Real Madrid will probably be less prone to that than other teams. And on the other hand, Dortmund, of course, have a lot of players for whom this is the first Champions League final, and who will be, I assume, very nervous. I mean, if I look at an Adeyemi or an Ian Maatsen or so, these are two players who are obviously very young. Jadon Sancho probably also in a similar situation, who will probably feel the nerves. I don't know how it's going to be with Sabitzer or Can in midfield, for example, how they're going to cope. My hope is that they will do fine, but you just never know, because this is something that can get to anybody, an occasion like this. Matthias, 65-35, when we talk about percentages, where are you in this whole discussion? How much of Real Madrid have you seen this year to even assess how good they are? Because I'll be honest, I have not seen much of them this season. I've watched them. I've watched the second leg against Bayern, but that's pretty much it. So I feel like my observations on Real Madrid are too limited to really talk about what they've done so far this season and how good they are. Obviously, they won the championship in Spain.
Well, I mean, I'm not too terribly much. I kind of dipped in and out of La Liga this season because I find overall that league has become relatively boring, to be perfectly honest. They're obviously very, very good. They have a lot of really good players. I heard, I think it was on the Totally Football show, they said the most one-sided Champions League final in history, maybe since 1997, which I'll take those odds. Because that tended to work out well. I would actually say if you include the European Cup along with the Champions League, I would say probably one of the most one-sided Champions League or European Cup finals was also with Real Madrid, was against Eintracht Frankfurt way back in the 50s, where Real Madrid scored, I think they won 7-3 or something like that at the end. So, I mean, there's obviously zero to no respect for Borussia Dortmund being able to pull anything off. 65-35, I think, sounds about right, because Real Madrid have not been without their blushes this season. La Liga made it relatively easy for them because Barcelona were not really too much in contention. They were a mess. Atletico Madrid were, pretty much a mess this season as well. So,
as we found out ourselves.
Yeah, and Girona, please. So, their tests have mainly come in the Champions League, and they got pushed pretty hard and pretty far by Bayern, who also didn't play very well. Can't underestimate that. They almost knocked Real Madrid out despite not playing that great. So that all being said, of course, you still have a Real Madrid where, Jude Bellingham is their top goal scorer with 19 goals. Vinicius Jr. with 15. Rodrigo and Joselu, Hannover 96, Joselu, with 10 goals. Brahim Diaz with 8. You still have a Toni Kroos. It's a formidable juggernaut of a team that it'll be interesting to see how and if Dortmund can stop them, because unlike PSG, where if you just look statistically at assists, their assists came from the wide areas, whereas obviously in a more central 4-3-1-2 system that Real Madrid seemingly likes to play with, most of their assists come centrally. So I'd be curious to see if Real Madrid lean into the loser stat of a lot of crosses against Dortmund after a while, or if they really try to break them down centrally. which will also not be easy. So I think 65-35 is a very fair assessment.
Yeah, Matthias, I'm very curious though. Obviously, as you just said, Real Madrid had close ties against any team in the knockout stages. You know, they squeaked by RB Leipzig with a 1-goal difference. Manchester City obviously also came super close. I don't know if this went to extra time or to penalties. And Bayern also obviously only defeated by 1 goal. But do you think that this is more of a strength for Real Madrid, that they have figured out a way to decide close games for themselves in the Champions League?
Well, I don't know about that, because Dortmund obviously have shown how they can hold on to leads in the Champions League. So, I mean, it's kind of like which one of those two is going to give. And, you know, I'm not, you know, I don't think this Real Madrid side is going to lack confidence, nor do I think they're going to go into it dripping of arrogance. So they believe in their ability to win this match any which way possible. And, you know, I don't see why Dortmund can't believe that they can at least push this far enough. I mean, if you think back to how Chelsea beat Bayern in the Champions League final back in 2012, I don't see it quite being that much parking the bus by Dortmund. But, you know, I'd say both sides, as far as mentally, I think both, but then it's a 50-50 game. If you're just looking at mentally plus the capability of players on the pitch, you know, that's why I'm saying the 65-35 is a very fair assessment.
Lars, when you look at the Real Madrid team, what lineup do you expect from Ancelotti going into this tie?
It's a bit of a funny question, because I think it's unsubstantiated rumors as of my latest knowledge that Andriy Lunin is actually sick, the goalkeeper who saved, I think, a couple penalties against Man City, if memory serves. So it might be Thibaut Courtois, which I don't know if that's necessarily a good or a bad thing for Dortmund, because while he's obviously, you know, the more decorated goalkeeper, he's also coming back from a long-term injury. And I think Lunin actually has been one of the, 5, 6, 7 best goalkeepers in Europe this season. So that's, as of my understanding, that's still unconfirmed. So maybe he's also able to make the trip a bit later, and then the decision is still open. I think Ancelotti hasn't actually said publicly whom he plans to start in goal. So I think that's the biggest question. Everything else, especially with the injury to Tchouaméni, is basically settled. So it's the usual lineup with Carvajal. Who's the second center back right now? Is it Nacho in the Champions League? I think it was Nacho quite often.
Nacho.
But might be. But I don't know if Militao is ready to start a Champions League game or final. Then obviously Rüdiger. Who's the left back is Ferland Mendy, right?
Yep.
Then you will have Kroos, Camavinga in central midfield with Tchouaméni out. Rodrigo, Vinicius, Bellingham. Who am I missing?
Valverde, maybe?
Yeah, because they don't really play a recognized striker, as Matthias mentioned earlier, because I think a lot of people will probably wonder, hey, why don't they just play Joselu because he scored the 2 goals in the semifinal? But Ancelotti basically has his starting 11, and the only questions are always, does Modric rotate in? Is whom of the midfielders does he have to leave out? So I think it's pretty much settled with the usual starting 11, and the real question is obviously Lunin or Courtois. But quite honestly, I don't think anything that Real Madrid decide is going to make much of a difference, because the the game plan, as it were, for both teams is probably set in stone regardless of personnel. So I don't think that Dortmund are going to react to anything that Real might be doing. Obviously, they won't know necessarily too early ahead of kickoff. So I don't think that Dortmund are going to tinker their lineup too much. So if we want to move into that, I think the only question really is who starts opposite of Sancho. I think there's been a lot of talk about Adeyemi versus Marlon, and I think Adeyemi has earned the starting spot with his defensive performances in the knockout stages, because he was great in the second leg against Atletico and then put in a real shift against PSG in both games. So I think Adeyemi has kind of deserved his starting spot, and then being able to bring Malen on during the game, I think, is a real advantage for Dortmund as well. So I don't know how you guys see it, but I think there's not much intrigue in terms of, the lineup decisions.
No, one question I do have, because I personally don't know how much of a loss is it for Real Madrid that Tchouaméni is. I don't know. I don't even know how you exactly pronounce his name. That he is out, because I assume he is otherwise set in central midfield, which is obviously a key position.
I think Camavinga is great from whenever I, which isn't too often, have seen Real Madrid. I didn't necessarily think that Tchouaméni or Camavinga made too much of a difference. I think I read somewhere that Tchouaméni actually has a crazy record in the Champions League. It's like he's never lost a Champions League game with Real Madrid or whatever. So from that perspective, maybe it makes a difference. But I mean, he's probably their best defensive-minded, holding midfielder. But how much holding midfielding do we think Real Madrid will have to do against Dortmund on Saturday? I think it's more about what they do on the ball mostly, and then I don't know that Camavinga isn't actually even a better player than Tchouaméni. So I don't know that it makes a huge difference, personally.
All right, thanks. Well, Matthias, Dortmund's lineup, as you said, Lars, is pretty set in stone. Would you choose Malen over Adeyemi going into this final? Or are there any different ways you would set up this team in comparison to previous Champions League ties? Or do you think that the starting lineup against PSG in the second leg is pretty much the starting lineup in the Champions League final?
I mean, there is some wisdom in the saying of never change a winning team, because of, automatisms and understanding of roles and stuff like that. I think Adeyemi, well, it really depends. I mean, I can see playing Malen instead of Adeyemi simply because it's different. PSG, they focused a lot on wing play and speed. And even though obviously Malen isn't slow by any stretch of the imagination, Adeyemi just fulfills that role very, very well. I think against Real Madrid, you're facing a slightly different beast. So I could see starting Malen over Adeyemi simply because Malen is more clinical in terms of goal scoring. And if you're going to have limited goal scoring opportunities, and they're going to be also on the break, in a 1v1 situation, I will trust Malen over Adeyemi in a situation like that. So I could see that argument being made and it working. The rest of the squad I would leave as is.
My question really is how much of Adeyemi's pace makes Real Madrid react to Dortmund versus Malen's pace. As you said, is still very fast, but Adeyemi is obviously on a different level. How does this affect Real Madrid when they see Adeyemi on the team sheet, and how will this, for example, influence how Dani Carvajal or a Mendy on the other side will then play themselves? How high and how far are they going to push up themselves and not risk being completely exposed by this world-class speed? Let's just say what it is, because it's more or less how Alphonso Davies scored against Real Madrid. Obviously, he also needed a lot of skill to pull it off, but I think the pace in his run to score the opening goal at the Bernabeu was very much speed related. So I think that, I want to have this advantage on the field for the majority of the time. So I'm actually leaning more toward Adeyemi, but on the other hand, if you have Daniel Malen in the form he did pre his injury that he picked up with the Dutch national team, it would be Malen for me without a doubt, because as you just said, Lars, he just was extremely clinical. And in the Champions League final, if there's one game where you really must take your chances, it's that one. Just ask Jakub Blaszczykowski if you have any doubts about that. So I think that's the, for me at least, that's like the only personal where I'm not entirely 100% sure which way to go. The other question is, who is going to be more effective off the bench? Lars, do you think it's Adeyemi's pace, or do you think that Malen, being, if he comes off the bench, is actually a bigger influencer of Dortmund's game? I'm also torn on that one.
I think that's looking at it the wrong way. I mean, you had it right the first time, in my opinion, Stefan. You should be looking at which decision benefits us for more of the game, and assuming it's not going to extra time or penalties, a sub is going to play fewer minutes than the starter. So I honestly think the entire debate comes down to who helps out better defensively against Rodrigo and Vinicius, because as we sort of alluded to earlier a few times, they don't play recognized strikers, so both Brazilians like to roam wide and make darting runs into the center, which is usually populated mostly by Bellingham, but sometimes by Valverde. I'm sure Camavinga will crop up and Kroos, in the background, trying to slot one in from distance with one of his passing finishes. So is Adeyemi a better bet to help out against Rodrigo if he starts on the left, or Vinicius whenever he switches sides with Sancho, or is Malen the better bet defensively? And I think from what we've seen over the last few weeks, somewhat unexpectedly, I guess, because Adeyemi was always kind of considered a bit lackadaisical in defense. He's really put in shifts in the last few Champions League games, so I wouldn't overcomplicate things and try to outsmart myself. Just play the team that has got you here and, figure things out during the game. I'm sure Marco Reus is going to come on just regardless of situation, basically, because it's going to be a mental boost for the team to see him get back on the pitch one final time for Dortmund. I'm sure whoever is left out the starting 11 between Adeyemi and Malen is going to get a look in, just because you want to bring on fresh legs, and then the rest is situational. Do you need a midfield runner and hope that for once Felix Metscher isn't sleepwalking around the pitch? Or do you want to bring on Aller and tempt fate almost and having him have some redemption story or whatever? Do you want to bring on Mukoko during the game? All these things, it doesn't make sense to lay out a plan 3 days in advance and then have that shot by an injury in the first half or whatever. You figure out the starting 11, and then you have a vague idea of what you're going to do during the game, but you let the game come to you and not the other way around.
All right, on the chance that we're all going to drown on platitudes now, Matthias, but what are the tangibles and intangibles Dortmund have to get right in this game to win it?
Wow. Clinical in front of goal, without a doubt. I mean, that's one of the big things, and they proved that overall. Also against PSG, the chances they did have, they scored from. Even though, there were two big ones that they didn't score from. Füllkrug in the first leg, and then, of course, Adeyemi in the second one. But overall, you can't argue they were more clinical than PSG. I mean,
Yes.
PSG were not clinical. Let's
They didn't score.
to put it
Yes.
mildly. I think the bigger question is who's going to be this go around's Lars Ricken, and why is it going to be Jamie Bino Gittens? I think it's like with any match like this, it's the same thing we said against PSG, the same thing we always say against Bayern. Dortmund need to play the perfect game. They need to play the perfect game in all phases. But honestly, so does Real Madrid. If Real Madrid is lax defensively and not clinical in front of goal, they are absolutely 100% going to lose this match. Because even though Dortmund are getting little to no respect or recognition, they are a very good team that can score a lot of goals against you if you are lax in that department. So for Dortmund, it's very simple. You have to keep that concentration up. You have to cut down the silly mistakes. If a player like Rodrigo or Vinicius Jr. are moving away from goal, don't stick a leg out Schlotterbeck or Adeyemi or Can and let them dive over it and then give Toni Kroos that type of set piece ability. You have to be really smart when it comes to those situations. And you can't bank on Real Madrid being as wasteful as a PSG was. Because they're not. They're way more clinical, and they're less of a one-man team. Whereas PSG was a one-man team. It was the Mbappe show, and he demanded the ball. Whereas with Real Madrid, it's not that. I mean, you just look at the spread of who's scoring the most goals. The fact that Jude Bellingham is their top goal scorer with 19 goals says a lot about how they can attack you and how they formulate their attack. So, I mean, you need to be on it for 90 minutes the whole time. And I think that's where Dortmund's sub-bench, specifically on the wings at pace, and their depth there is very good. And so you can swap that out a little bit, but you need to be concentrated. That's the main thing. You can't have those lapses. And if Dortmund don't have those lapses and play to their strengths that they have shown in the Champions League ever since that opening loss to PSG, I think they have a very good chance of pulling this one off.
Lars, here's a listener question that I think is an interesting one. At BVB Ian 1909 wants to know, how will the experience of Hummels, Roy, Schein, Bender, Kehl of playing in the last Champions League final for Dortmund help the team this time around?
I don't know. I don't know that it makes a huge difference. Obviously, playing a Champions League final is still different to, the second leg in a semi-final, but I don't know that it makes a humongous difference, because these are all, I mean, the big difference in comparison to 2013 is that Dortmund are a much older, more experienced team. Now, obviously, quite a few of their players, despite age, haven't necessarily been, at the highest level in the Champions League final. So, the perfect example is Füllkrug. He's, 31, I think. But it's only his first Champions League season. But still, I don't know that Niklas Füllkrug on Saturday, half an hour before the game, is suddenly, crowding the toilet because he's shitting himself or whatever. I think, by and large, this is a fairly veteran team, with the odd exception. But even who's the youngest starter for Dortmund, Madsen, he doesn't seem to me like the kind of guy that's going to be faced too much. The next youngest, Sancho, I mean, he's played in the Euros final. Now, obviously, he doesn't want to be reminded of that because he missed the penalty after stupidly being put on in the final minute of extra time. Who's the next youngest? It's already Schlotterbeck, who's 24, I think, and who has been playing at Bundesliga level at least for 4 years or whatever. He's been in the cup final for Freiburg. It's his second Champions League season.
I think Adeyemi is actually younger than Madsen.
Yeah, right. Sorry. But he also, I mean, I never think about these things in terms of, attacking players. Like, what's the harm in, an attacking player having a bit of the nerves in such a game? I mean, maybe he's going to miss a chance. Okay, that can happen, but it's not like he's going to make the catastrophic mistake, most likely anyway. So I obviously, it makes a difference to play for Real Madrid, who are going for their sixth title since the turn of the century or whatever, and the 15th overall, versus it's Dortmund's third final in club history. But I don't know that it makes, that much of a difference once the game starts. It's more about the build-up and all that. And I think, as we kind of mentioned earlier, in that regard, it probably helps to be the underdog because the level of expectation is lower. And as I said, it's kind of an achievement already to be there. So I struggle to see how, Dortmund are going to lose the game because they have a lack of experience or too many nerves going around. I think if they lose, it's just because they are ultimately the worst team and Real Madrid have a special relationship with the Champions League.
Yeah, might very well be that way. But if there's one thing I would say, which I assume will be different to the previous Champions League final, if there's, I don't know if you want to call it a mistake per se, but what Dortmund did in that final under Jürgen Klopp is try to press Bayern as hard as they possibly could in the first half hour or so. And Dortmund obviously dominated the opening period of that game. Due to that fact, but could not quite convert that into goals, and you could see that toward the end of the game, Dortmund were clearly the more tired team than Bayern. I don't think that we have to worry about that scenario this time in the same extreme way. Obviously, as we've seen with the semi-final, Dortmund had to outrun PSG by 10 kilometers approximately both times, which something we at least didn't expect to happen in the second leg, but it pretty much repeated itself there. I assume the same will be true this time, just because Dortmund will be having less of the ball. But that being said, I don't think that Dortmund are going to press as severely as that 2013 team did, just because they are incapable of doing that, simply put. But also because I don't think that this is going to be the approach. Now, what I really want to see from this Dortmund team is what they have also shown against Atletico and PSG, is that when they had the ball, when they had the chance to break, is that they not every time try to force the issue right away and try to score out of every transition opportunity, but every now and then just also step on the ball, try to control the pace of the game a little bit here and there, because I don't think it helps Dortmund if they are just trying to rush things every single time. And I thought that was actually quite good of them to do it. And as far as experience goes, I think Dortmund have shown this Champions League season really how much of a mature team they are overall, how heady they are in the Champions League. Something obviously they've not always displayed in the Bundesliga, but certainly when the Champions League anthem plays, a switch is being flipped, and I think they all grow up a little bit. Obviously, it's a bit more of a risk-averse game in the Champions League overall, but I hope that Dortmund show the same level of discipline and avoid horrendous giveaways in midfield, be it Emre Can or Julian Brandt also, who are sometimes prone to silly little errors. Just as you said earlier, Matthias, I think that would be for me sort of the key, that Dortmund obviously know what the occasion is, but don't quite lose their heads, and they have demonstrated beforehand that they can do it. So my hope is that they will do it again. And when we talk about factors that we might have in this game that we didn't have beforehand, I think Sebastian Aller will come to mind, because I do believe that he is available this time around. Obviously, he has decided the Africa Cup of Nations with a goal himself this year, so he knows how to do it, but obviously he lacks rhythm. He does not have the experience. So, as you said, Lars, I don't know in the situation if you bring in Aller or Moukoko, if you need to sub out a striker. But that being said, I personally, as of right now, still do trust Sebastian Aller in a Champions League final in a game of this magnitude for, I don't know, a 20-minute cameo. I believe that he can help this Dortmund team out. Obviously, I have no idea how this game and the run of play will be, if Dortmund in the end will be chasing the game or if they will be trying to hold on to the lead, or it might be tight going into the last 10 minutes of the game. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Matthias, are there any other things you want to discuss going into this game?
I mean, you're looking at Carlo Ancelotti, who I read today said he wants to end his career at Real Madrid. The question is only when that'll be, and of course he wants to win his 5th Champions League trophy. And then you've got Edin Terzic, who, we also are not sure what his future holds. But as we'd mentioned before, if he wins the Champions League, I pretty much don't think you can let him go. So, I mean, there is that intriguing aspect there as well. You have the veteran coach who's been there, done it 4 times against a coach who has a lot to prove, and a lot of doubters. And to see if that factors in any way with nerves on the sideline. He's got a team around him, Edin Terzic does, but at the end of the day, it's still his call. So that'll be an interesting one to watch as well.
Yeah. Lars, maybe there's one... well, there are several side stories coming out of the Dortmund camp today. One we've already said we're not really going to talk about, even though we all have our thoughts and opinions and will very much share them soon enough. However, we also have been asked about the Mats Hummels comments at the ice cream cone. Funny little Twitter handle there. Saying thoughts on the Hummels interview. Lars, since you out of the 3 of us are probably best at paraphrasing what Hummels said, even though I don't know if you've read it closely enough to do it properly. I'm still asking you to sort of repeat what he said and what your thoughts on that are.
I mean, I'm in the danger of paraphrasing a paraphrased version of his interview, so I would advise people, and I'm sure most people will have read the comments before listening to this episode, so I'm not going to, try to make too much of a mess of it, but it basically reads like sort of an evisceration of Edin Terzic's tactics in a few games this season, especially against Leverkusen and Stuttgart. Obviously, they met Stuttgart thrice, losing twice, losing all 3 times, actually. Didn't they?
Yes.
In the Bundesliga and the Cup, and then obviously the 2 draws against Leverkusen, which were quite lucky. And Hummels basically, not verbatim, said that it's not the kind of, performance or approach or whatever that he wants to see from a Dortmund side.
He was talking about the first half of the season, I presume.
I don't know. I'm saying I don't want to paraphrase something that was already paraphrased and maybe lost in translation, where people can make up their own minds. I think the gist of it is, somewhat damning, and, I think most people are asking themselves what exactly he thinks he's gaining by making these comments this week of all weeks. I think we talked about before we hit the record button, that it kind of reads like something that he would say after the season is over, when he presumably will announce that he's not going to continue at Dortmund. I think that is definitely more likely, in my opinion, now than it was before this interview, because that kind of reads like burning some bridges. And the obvious question is, why would you do that now? Why wouldn't you hold on to your resentment or whatever for 4 more days, and then, if that's your final Dortmund game, I don't know. But also, I think it kind of is getting blown out of proportion a little bit, because if anyone thinks that this is going to have a real impact on their preparation or even performance in the Champions League final, then I find that ridiculous, because it's the biggest game in club football. for a lot of these guys, it's going to be their one and only opportunity at the biggest prize in club football. So if public comments from one of your most veteran players who sort of has the right to just speak his mind and be truthful to himself and all that good stuff, if that really makes an impact, then you don't deserve the chance of playing in the Champions League final. I just think, obviously, it's not necessarily smart to open up a can of worms or whatever, but it shouldn't have any tangible impact. I think it's more something that maybe makes for a few uncomfortable moments at the water cooler in the locker room or whatever, but it shouldn't be anything too serious in terms of what happens in London.
Well, I mean, as far as I understood, Mats Hummels basically said that it was not Dortmund to play the, as Matthias said, chicken shit football, especially in the first half of the season, and that it's obviously not okay that other teams play Dortmund and Dortmund fails to dominate them. So yeah, I mean, he is right. I think he also said that the addition of Shine and Bender helped in that regard. But I'm right there with you. It might be a little bit annoying that he says it right now, but I also don't think it really has an impact. And overall, everything he said, I think, is pretty much correct now. And I don't know if you have anything to add, Matthias.
Nope.
All right. Last final thoughts on the Champions League game. Obviously, there are storylines and narratives like it is going to be Marco Reus's final game, and obviously the meaning of him winning it versus not winning it is not lost on any Dortmund fan. We didn't really talk about this. We didn't talk too much about some individual players, be it Schlotterbeck, Hummels, Riasson, or Sabitzer. I don't know, but I don't know if you want to do this right now or if you have more overall thoughts before we end this episode.
I sort of have two closing thoughts, and one is basically adding to what you guys mentioned earlier. Just, I don't want the typical Dortmund versus Bayern drubbing that we've not had this season, but a few times in the last few years, especially in Munich. It usually involved an early set-piece goal for Bayern, and then everything crumbled for Dortmund. So no silly set-piece conceded goal, no dumb penalty fouls. Make Real Madrid beat you. If Toni Kroos banks one in from 25 yards, you tip your cap and say, hey, great for your end of career. Sorry, it had to be against Dortmund, but just don't lose the game in a silly way. Like, that would be the most hurtful, because this might very well, considering how, the powers that be are shaping football, this might be the last chance for the next, 25 years for Dortmund to win the Champions League. That's the first point. And second point is kind of in the same vein. I don't want any annoying controversy, no Franck Ribéry not getting sent off because it's the Champions League final and he elbowed someone. That's a red card. Go off. Dante not being sent off in 2013 for no reason. I don't want that either. And to be fair, also Lewandowski should have been sent off in that final. No phantom goals being disallowed, either because of the Mats Hummels goal against Bayern in the cup final a few years back, or
premature offside whistle.
Premature offside whistle, or a phantom foul as before the Bellingham goal against Man City, which was disallowed a few years back. Like, none of that shit. Just give me a straight 90 minutes of football, maybe 120 minutes of football. And if Dortmund, or if Real Madrid are, a step too far for Dortmund, then that's okay. I mean, we are all in acknowledgement of the fact that Dortmund are very much the underdogs and that we are the optimists for once. And we are still saying it's like 65-35 in favor of Real Madrid. So if the normal thing happens, and that is a Real Madrid win, I want it to be, merited on football and on what happens on the pitch, and not either a stupid Dortmund mistake or, a controversial decision. Unless it's in Dortmund's favor, then of course go ahead.
Right. I have two closing thoughts myself. One is I'm excited to see the yellow wall in Wembley again, and wonder how Dortmund probably having a bigger amount of fans and probably a larger amount of fans in the stadium. How will that affect the game? I don't know. And the other thing is, and that's really just a very minor thing, but it still would be nice if the pre-game ceremony wasn't as cringe as the last time. That's all I have. Matthias? Matthias?
Yeah, I was thinking there was going to be a question, not just my
No,
name.
that was just so me handing it over to you. You do the outro now.
The outro is, I have a handful of sporting events in my life that stand out as truly amazing moments. And the 1997 Champions League win is one of those. So it would be great to replicate that in Marco Reus's last match for Borussia Dortmund, because he definitely deserves that. And to share that moment with my kids would also be fantastic. So that's my closing sentiment to this.
All right, now you have to say thank you for listening and goodbye.
Thank you for listening and goodbye.
Wonderful.